At a family dinner, my own son slammed his fist on the table, pointed his finger directly at my face, and said, "You're getting old, Mom. Pack your things and find a small apartment to rent. Arthur and Madeline are moving into your master bedroom next week. If you were a real mother, you would know how to sacrifice." That night, I made one phone call, and by the next morning, everything that followed left each one of them pale and speechless. Thank you for being here with Silent Revenge with Phoenix. It means everything. Now tell me something. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country below. Let us see how far this story reaches. One thing before we continue this story includes fictional elements created for entertainment and educational purposes. Names and settings are coincidental, but what Claire learned, you will not forget. My name is Claire Bennett. I am 55 years old and I built everything I own with my own 2 hands. After my husband Gerald passed away from a heart attack 14 years ago, I did not fall apart. I folded his suits, donated his golf clubs to the church fundraiser, and went back to work the following Monday. People called me cold. I called it survival. From a single rented studio in Culver City with 2 sewing machines and a part-time seamstress named Rosa Medina, I built Claire's Chic into one of the most recognized mid-luxury fashion labels in Los Angeles. Rosa stayed with me every step of the way, first as a seamstress, then as my head of household when we moved into the Bel Air estate 12 years ago. She was not just an employee. She was the only person in my daily life who never asked me for anything. My son Ethan was 16 when Gerald died. I poured everything I had left into raising him private school in Pasadena, a semester abroad in Florence, a car on his 21st birthday, and eventually a vice president title at Claire's Chic that he had not earned but wore like a crown. I told myself it was opportunity. Looking back, I understand it was guilt dressed up as generosity. I was afraid that if I did not give Ethan everything, I would lose him the way I had lost Gerald suddenly without warning, without a chance to say I should have done more. Ethan met Sierra Cole at a rooftop party in West Hollywood 3 years ago. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, polished, deliberate, constructed. Within 6 months, she had moved into the estate. Within a year, her parents, Arthur and Madeline Cole, were spending weekends in the guest suite. Within 2 years, her younger sister Daphne had a brand coordinator badge at Claire's Chic, and her older brother Adam was running security at our downtown warehouse. I watched all of it happen. I told myself it was family. It was not family. It was a quiet occupation, and I had left every door unlocked. The night everything changed was a Thursday in July. A Pacific storm had rolled in off the coast, and rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows of the dining room in sheets. I remembered the sound clearly, the way it swallowed the silence between sentences, the way it made the room feel sealed off from the rest of the world like a snow globe someone had picked up and shaken hard. Rosa had prepared a rack of lamb with rosemary potatoes, the kind of dinner I cooked when Gerald was alive, and we had something to celebrate. No one had told me what we were celebrating. Arthur Cole sat at the far end of the table swirling a glass of Cabernet with the ease of a man who had been drinking someone else's wine for years. Madeline was cutting her meat into perfect squares. Daphne was scrolling her phone under the table. Sierra sat beside Ethan, her left hand resting flat on the tablecloth, her engagement ring catching the light from the chandelier above us, the chandelier I had picked out at a showroom on Melrose Avenue the year I paid off the estate mortgage. Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk about the house." I set down my fork. "What about the house?" He did not look at me when he answered. He looked at Arthur, and Arthur gave the smallest nod, and something cold moved through my chest before Ethan said a single word. "You're getting old, Mom." His voice was measured, almost rehearsed. Living alone in a place this size is such a waste. Arthur and Madeline need their own space. They're family now. It makes sense for them to move into the master suite. He paused, and when he continued, his voice sharpened the way it did when he wanted to sound decisive. "You should find yourself a smaller place. An apartment somewhere. Something manageable." I looked at my son. I looked at the chair he was sitting in, the dining chair I had ordered from a craftsman in Santa Barbara, the one that arrived with a small dent in the leg and that I had paid to have repaired before anyone else sat in it. "This is my home," I said. Ethan's jaw tightened. He pushed back from the table and stood. His voice came up in volume the way it had when he was 17, and I had taken his car keys after finding liquor in his backpack, that same furious entitlement, but older, now harder, with an audience watching. "You're getting old, Mom. Living alone in this mansion is such a waste." He pointed at me, actually pointed. His finger aimed across the table like an accusation. "Pack your things and find yourself a small apartment to rent. Arthur and Madeline are moving into your master bedroom next week. If you were a real mother, you would know how to sacrifice for your children's future. Don't make me ashamed of you in front of my wife's family just because you are too selfish to let go." The room went very still. Sierra's lips curved, not quite a smile, more a confirmation, the expression of someone watching a plan land exactly where it was aimed. Arthur took a slow sip of wine. Madeline cut another square of lamb. Daphne finally looked up from her phone. Not one of them said a word in my defense. I sat at the head of the table I had owned for 11 years in the home I had paid for in full, and I understood with a clarity that felt almost physical, like a door swinging open onto cold air, that this moment had been rehearsed. The Cole family had come to dinner already knowing how it would end. The rack of lamb, the good Cabernet Rosa's careful table setting all of it, had been backdrop for an eviction I was supposed to accept quietly and call love. My hands were resting in my lap. I pressed them flat against my thighs so no one could see them trembling. I thought about Gerald. I thought about the 2 sewing machines in Culver City. I thought about every invoice I had signed, every school tuition check, every payroll deposit that kept Claire's Chic running and the Bel Air estate lit and warm. Then I thought about Rosa, who had given me 15 years of loyalty and never once asked me for a single room. I folded my napkin. I placed it beside my plate. I looked at Ethan, really looked at him the way I had not let myself look in a long time, and I said very quietly, "I understand." Ethan exhaled. His shoulders dropped with relief. He heard surrender in those 2 words. He was wrong. I excused myself, walked down the hall, and closed my bedroom door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time, Gerald's photograph on the nightstand beside me, rain still loud against the glass. My chest ached with something that was not quite grief and not quite rage, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. At 11 o'clock, I picked up my phone and called Margaret Torres Megg, my director of legal affairs, who had been quietly documenting the financial irregularities inside Claire's Chic for the past 18 months. She answered on the second ring. "Meg," I said, "it's time." I did not sleep that night. By 5 in the morning, I had already showered, dressed, and made myself a cup of coffee I barely touched. Rosa found me at the kitchen island when she came down at 5:30. She took one look at my face and did not ask a single question. She simply refilled my cup and stood beside me, while the sky outside turned from black to gray, to the pale orange of an early Los Angeles summer. "They were laughing last night," she said quietly. "After you went to your room, Ethan opened a bottle of your Burgundy, the good one, the 2014 you were saving." I wrapped both hands around my mug. "I know. Miss Claire." Rosa's voice dropped. "Where do you want me to go?" I looked at her. 15 years. She had packed Gerald's hospital bag. She had held my hand at his funeral. She had stayed through every late night, every bad season, every moment when Claire's Chic felt like it was held together with nothing but stubbornness and prayer. "I found an apartment in West Hollywood," I said. "2 bedrooms. You'll have your own bathroom." I paused. "If you want to come." Rosa pressed her lips together hard. Her eyes went bright. "Tell me when to pack," she said. At 6:15, I was in the car. By 7, I was sitting across from James Whitfield in his corner office on the 34th floor of a building on Bunker Hill, downtown Los Angeles. James had been my attorney for 19 years. He was 62, unhurried, and had the kind of stillness that expensive lawyers develop after decades of watching panic walk through their door. He slid a folder across the desk without preamble. "Meg sent everything over at midnight," he said. "I've been through it twice." I opened the folder. 18 months of documentation, wire transfers, purchase orders bearing Ethan's signature vendor invoices that did not match any legitimate Claire's Chic supplier. $400,000 moved through 23 separate transactions, each one deliberately kept below the $10,000 federal reporting threshold, small enough to avoid automatic flags, consistent enough to tell a very clear story. "He knew exactly what he was doing," I said. "He did." James folded his hands on the desk. Daphne Cole co-signed 11 of those transactions. Her role as brand coordinator gave her purchase authorization up to $50,000 per quarter. She used every dollar of it. He let that settle, then added, "We have enough to file today." I nodded. "Before we do that, the credit card." James reached for his phone. "Arthur Cole's supplemental card on your personal account. You want it terminated." Immediately. He made one call. It took less than 4 minutes. Somewhere across Los Angeles, a black card with Arthur Cole's name embossed on the front was reduced to a worthless piece of plastic. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt the particular exhaustion of someone who has finally stopped pretending a wound is not there. Rosa called me at 11:45. She was at the farmer's market on 3rd Street, something I had asked her to do, so she would have a reason to be near Beverly Hills that morning. Her voice was low and careful, the way it gets when she is trying not to laugh. "They just sat down at Marcello's," she said. Marcello's was a Michelin-starred restaurant on Cannon Drive, the kind of place where the tasting menu ran $2,200 for 4 people before wine. "Arthur has the card out already. He's showing it to the waiter." I said nothing. I waited. 3 minutes later, Rosa's voice came back. The waiter just returned the card. A pause. He returned it twice. I could hear faintly in the background Arthur Cole's voice rising that particular register of a man who is accustomed to deference and has just been denied it in public. I heard Ethan's voice beneath his lower urgent trying to manage the situation. I heard nothing from Sierra or Madeline, which told me they had already understood what Arthur had not yet accepted. "Ethan paid," Rosa said. "He used his own card. His hand was shaking when he signed." I thanked her and ended the call. James was watching me from across the desk. "How do you feel?" he asked. It was not the kind of question James usually asked. He was a contracts man, a litigation man. Feelings were not his department. The fact that he asked told me he understood this was not only a legal matter. "I feel like I should have done this a long time ago," I said. He nodded once. He picked up his pen. "Then let's get to work." Before I left his office, James paused with one hand on the folder. "The utility contracts on the estate," he said. "Electricity, water, internet, they're all in your name." "Every one of them," I said. He looked at me steadily. "Do you want me to handle the transfers, or would you prefer to do it yourself?" I picked up my bag from the chair beside the door. I thought about Ethan opening my best bottle of Burgundy while I sat alone in the dark. I thought about Arthur Cole's hand extending a card that had never belonged to him toward a waiter who now knew exactly what kind of man he was. "That one," I said, "I'll handle myself." I made 3 phone calls that afternoon. The first was to Southern California Edison. I requested an immediate transfer of the electricity account at the Bel Air estate from the property address to my new billing address in West Hollywood. The representative confirmed it would take effect within 24 hours. The second call was to the water district. Same request, same answer. The third was to the internet provider. That one took 11 minutes because the representative kept asking whether I was certain I wanted to cancel service at a residential address. I told her I had never been more certain of anything in my life. She processed the cancellation. I did all 3 sitting in my new apartment on the floor because the furniture had not arrived yet. The room smelled like fresh paint and unfamiliar air. Outside the window, West Hollywood moved at its usual pace, indifferent, loud, alive. I found that I did not mind the noise. After years of a house large enough to swallow sound, there was something honest about hearing the city. Rosa had arrived 2 hours before me. She had already arranged the kitchen with what she had brought: 2 mugs, a kettle, a cutting board, the small framed photograph of Gerald that used to sit on my nightstand. She had placed it on the windowsill where the afternoon light hit it directly. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I went back to my phone calls. The footage from the estate's security system, which I could still access remotely because the account was registered to my email, showed me everything I needed to see. The Cole family arrived at 2 in the afternoon in a rented SUV packed so full that Sierra had a vanity case balanced on her lap. Arthur stepped out first, straightening his jacket the way men do when they want to look like they own something. Ethan used his key. The front door opened, and then nothing happened. No Rosa appearing from the kitchen, no housekeeper descending the staircase, no familiar sounds of a home being managed by people who cared for it. The house was exactly as I had left it, intact, clean, and utterly empty of anyone who worked for me. I watched on my phone screen as Madeline walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Rosa had cleared it before leaving, not dramatically, not vindictively, simply because the food belonged to my household account and my household had moved. Madeline stared into an empty refrigerator for a long moment. Then she closed it. Daphne dropped 2 large suitcases in the entryway and looked around with the expression of someone who had been promised a party and arrived to find a waiting room. "Where is everyone?" she called out. No one answered, because there was no one there to answer. Arthur found me on my cell phone at 4:15. "Claire." His voice had lost the leisurely quality it carried at dinner. "There seems to be a situation at the house. We cannot locate any of the staff." "They don't work there anymore," I said. "They work for me." I moved. A pause so long I could hear him breathing. "The refrigerator is empty." "Yes. Claire, this is completely unacceptable. We have luggage. We have—" He stopped, started again. "Ethan will hear about this." "I'm sure he will," I said, and ended the call. The electricity went out at 9 the following morning. Rosa told me about it later. She had a former colleague still living 2 streets away from the estate who sent her a message. The lights in the Bel Air house simply stopped. Then the water pressure dropped to nothing. By afternoon, the Wi-Fi router had gone dark, and Sierra's attempt to live stream what she had been calling her new home reveal cut out mid-sentence in front of 40,000 viewers. I did not watch the live stream. Rosa did, and she described it to me over tea in our half-furnished kitchen, Sierra's face going from practiced excitement to confusion to something raw and unfiltered that no ring light could soften. Ethan called me 14 times between 9 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. I watched his name appear on my screen and appear, and disappear, the way a warning light blinks on a dashboard you have been ignoring for too long. On the 15th call, I picked up. "Mom," his voice cracked down the middle. "What did you do? The power is gone. There's no water." Sierra had a brand partnership call and the internet it's gone, Mom, all of it. I transferred the service accounts to my new address, I said. I was the account holder. It was my right. "You can't this is insane. We have nothing. We can't live like this." I thought about the night before, the 2014 Burgundy he had opened without asking, the way Arthur Cole had nodded at my son like a general approving an order. "Ethan," I said, "check your work email." He went quiet on the other end of the line. Not the quiet of someone thinking, the quiet of someone who has just understood that the ground beneath them is not as solid as they believed. "What did you send me?" he whispered. "Read it," I said. "Then call James Whitfield's office. His number is in the signature." I ended the call. Across the room, Rosa set a fresh cup of tea on the table in front of me without being asked. Outside, Los Angeles went on being Los Angeles enormous and unhurried and completely unconcerned with the collapse happening in a house in Bel Air. The email I sent Ethan contained one attachment. It was a 47-page financial report that Meg Torres had spent 18 months assembling every transaction, every vendor invoice, every purchase order bearing Ethan's signature as Vice President of Operations at Claire's Chic. The cover page had no introduction, no explanation, no personal note from me. It said only, "Prepared by Margaret Torres, Director of Legal Affairs. Submitted to James Whitfield, Attorney at Law. Filed with Los Angeles Superior Court Civil Division." I did not need to say anything else. The numbers said everything. James had moved quickly. In California, when a plaintiff can demonstrate that a defendant is likely to conceal or transfer assets before a judgment is reached, the court can issue what is called a writ of attachment, a legal order, freezing specific assets so they cannot be moved or sold while the case proceeds. James had argued exactly that in his filing. The designer goods Sierra and Madeline were wearing and carrying had been purchased with company funds, and given that the Cole family had no fixed address in Los Angeles and had already demonstrated a willingness to spend money that was not theirs, the judge agreed. The writ came through in 61 hours. Donna Parker was a financial investigator with the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. James had worked with her on 2 previous cases. She was 45 precise and had a particular talent for explaining court orders to people who did not want to hear them. She called me the morning the writ was issued. "We'll serve the civil summons and the writ simultaneously, she said. "It's cleaner that way. Less room for anyone to move anything before we get there." "Ethan is staying at the Montrose in West Hollywood," I said. "Daphne is in the room next to his. We'll be there by noon." I was not present when it happened. I was at the Claire's Chic studio on West 3rd Street reviewing the fall collection with my head designer, doing the ordinary work of a business that had run for 25 years because I showed up for it every day. Meg called me at 12:43. "It's done," she said. "Donna's team served both of them. How did Ethan react?" Meg was quiet for a moment. "He sat down on the floor of the hallway," she said. "Just sat down, right there in the corridor of the hotel." I set down the fabric swatch I had been holding. I thought about Ethan at 7 years old, sitting on the kitchen floor after he fell off his bicycle, waiting for me to come and tell him it was going to be all right. I had always come. Every single time I had come. "And Daphne?" I asked. She cried. Then she called her mother. Then she cried again. I thanked Meg and ended the call. The civil complaint listed 2 causes of action. The first was embezzlement under California Penal Code, Section 503, the fraudulent appropriation of property by a person to whom it had been entrusted. Ethan, as Vice President of Operations, had been entrusted with significant financial authority over Claire's Chic. He had used that authority to move $400,000 through 23 transactions into accounts controlled by himself and his wife. The second cause of action was breach of fiduciary duty, the legal obligation that corporate officers owe to the company they serve, an obligation Ethan had violated every time he signed a fraudulent purchase order. Daphne's charge was aiding and abetting. Her purchase authorization had been legitimate. Her use of it had not been. That evening, Ethan called from a number I did not recognize. I answered because I had decided somewhere between the writ being issued and the fall collection review that there were certain conversations I owed my son the dignity of having directly. His voice was not angry. It had passed through anger and come out the other side into something quieter and more frightening. "Mom," he said, "I don't have $400,000. "I know," I said. "Then what happens to me?" "That depends on what you do next," I said. "James Whitfield's number is in the email. If you retain your own attorney and cooperate fully with the court, the civil process gives you a path to repayment. If you don't—" I stopped. Donna Parker's office handles the criminal referral. Grand theft in California carries up to 3 years. He breathed hard on the other end of the line. "You would let them put me in prison?" The question sat between us for a long moment. I thought about the dinner table. I thought about his finger pointed across the table at me. I thought about Arthur Cole's slow, satisfied nod. "I would let the law do what the law does," I said. "What happens next is up to you." I heard him swallow. "Does Arthur know," he asked, "about the filing?" "He will," I said, "by morning." Another silence. Then, He's going to leave Mom. The minute he finds out I'm broke and facing charges, he's going to take Sierra and leave. I did not tell him he was wrong, because he was not wrong and we both knew it. Get a lawyer, Ethan, I said. Tonight. I ended the call. Meg was waiting outside my office door with a folder, the next step already prepared, already organized, because that was who Meg was, and that was what she did. Donna's team moves tomorrow morning, she said, for the asset recovery. I took the folder. I'll be there, I said. Before I tell you what happened when Donna's team arrived at that hotel and what Claire sent Ethan that finally shut down every threat he had left, type Phoenix in the comments, so I know you are still with me. What Claire does next is something most people never have the courage to do. And a quick note, the story ahead contains some fictional elements shaped for depth and impact. If that is not your kind of content, no hard feelings, you are free to step away anytime. But if you are staying, you will want to see this through. I arrived at the Montrose at 8:50 in the morning and waited in the car. I had not planned to come inside. I told myself I was there because James had asked me to be available by phone in case Donna's team needed to verify any item on the asset list. That was true. It was also true that after 18 months of watching from a distance, some part of me needed to see it end. Donna Parker. She knocked on Sierra's door first. I watched from the lobby camera feed on my phone, the same security app I had used to watch the Cole family arrive at the Bel Air estate 3 days earlier. Sierra opened the door in a silk robe. She looked at Donna's badge, then at the document Donna extended toward her, and her face went through several expressions, very quickly. Confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like genuine physical pain. "You can't be serious," Sierra said. Her voice was sharp, the practiced composure of her video persona completely gone. "These are my things. I own these." "Ma'am," Donna said, "the writ of attachment issued by Los Angeles Superior Court identifies these items by purchase date, vendor, and transaction reference number. Each one was acquired using Claire's chic corporate funds without authorization. I need you to step aside." "I want to call my lawyer." "You're welcome to do that," Donna said. "We'll wait, but the items on this list are coming with us either way." Sierra called no one. She stepped aside. I watched Donna's colleague work through the list with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this many times before: 7 designer handbags, 3 watches, 2 sets of jewelry. Each item was photographed, logged, and placed into a numbered evidence bag. The whole process took 34 minutes. Madeline Cole appeared from the adjoining room halfway through. She was still in her nightgown, her hair not yet done, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked exactly her age. She stood in the doorway and watched her daughter's belongings being cataloged and removed. And when she tried to speak, Donna's deputy simply held up the court order without looking at her, and Madeline pressed her lips together and said nothing further. When it was over, I stepped out of the lobby and walked to my car. I did not go upstairs. I did not need Sierra to see me there. The writ had spoken louder than anything I could have said. Ethan's message came at 11:15. Not a call this time, a text which told me he was either too exhausted or too ashamed to hear my voice. "You can't take the house from me. I'm your son. I grew up there. You can't just erase that." I sat with the message for a moment. Then I forwarded it to James with a single line: "Please prepare the response." James sent me the documents within the hour. I reviewed them, made no changes, and forwarded the package directly to Ethan. The package contained 3 items. The first was a copy of the property deed for the Bel Air estate, Claire Margaret Bennett, sole owner, recorded with the Los Angeles County Assessor's Office 12 years ago. The second was the most recent property tax statement, $44,800 due, in 2 installments paid in full each year by Claire Margaret Bennett. The third was an independent appraisal conducted 8 months earlier, placing the current market value of the property at $3.2 million. My message read, "The home is mine. It has always been mine. If you would like your name on the deed, You are welcome to purchase it from me at the appraised value and assume responsibility for annual property taxes. I am available to discuss through our respective attorneys." He did not respond for 4 hours. When he finally did, it was not an argument. It was 3 words. "I understand now." I set my phone face down on the desk and looked out the window of my West Hollywood apartment at the late afternoon light, moving across the buildings on the opposite side of the street. There was a woman walking a dog below, a delivery truck idling at the corner, the ordinary machinery of a city that did not know or care that a family had just finished collapsing. Rosa brought me tea without being asked. She set it on the desk and stood beside me for a moment, looking at the same view. Then she went back to the kitchen and I stayed at the window alone. Meg called that evening. Her voice was careful in the way it gets when she is about to say something she has been holding for a while. "I need to tell you something about Adam Cole," she said. "Something that came up during the insurance audit." I turned away from the window. "Tell me." "Not over the phone," Meg said. "Can you come to the office tomorrow morning?" I told her I would be there at 7. That night, I sat at the kitchen table in my half-furnished apartment and wrote a list of everything I had given Ethan over the course of his life, not to calculate a debt, but because I needed to understand how I had arrived at a Thursday night in July when my son pointed his finger at me across a dinner table and called me selfish. I filled 3 pages. Then I folded them and put them in a drawer. Some accounting is not meant to be shared. It is only meant to be understood. Before I tell you what Sierra admitted inside that conference room and what lit up on the screen at the most important fashion event in Los Angeles, that night comment 111 below, so I know you are still with me. What Claire had prepared for this moment had been years in the making, and no one in that room saw it coming. Note some elements of this story are fictional, built for meaning and reflection. If this is not the content for you, you are welcome to step away right here. Meg was already at her desk when I arrived at 7. She had a folder open in front of her and a cup of coffee she had not touched. That told me everything I needed to know about how long she had been there and how seriously she was taking what was inside it. "Sit down," she said. I sat. "You remember when the insurance carrier required the updated background check last quarter?" she said. "Standard requirement, any company with our level of commercial liability coverage has to run verified background checks on all personnel with facility access every 18 months. "I remember," I said. "We ran them in April." "We ran them in April," Meg confirmed. "Adam Cole submitted his paperwork in March when Ethan brought him on as head of warehouse security. The form asked specifically whether the applicant had ever been convicted of a felony or misdemeanor involving theft, fraud, or dishonesty." She turned the folder toward me. "He checked no." I looked at the document. Then I looked at the report clipped behind it, a Nevada criminal record from 2019. Petty theft elevated to grand theft when the total exceeded $950. Conviction: 18 months probation with standard conditions that included honest disclosure on all employment applications. "He lied on the form," I said. "Deliberately," Meg said. "And his probation conditions from Nevada explicitly prohibit false statements on employment applications. The moment he checked that box, he violated his probation." She paused. "I've already spoken to Donna Parker. She contacted his probation officer in Clark County last night." I thought about Adam Cole at my warehouse, the way he moved through the space with a familiarity that had always felt slightly wrong, like someone who had spent time studying the exits. "What was he doing with the design files?" I asked. "Rosa flagged it first," Meg said. "She noticed him photographing the fall collection samples on his phone, the pieces that haven't been shown publicly yet. He also copied our primary vendor contact list onto a personal drive." Meg closed the folder. "We don't know yet who he was sharing that information with. Donna's team will determine that." At 10 o'clock, 2 officers from the LAPD arrived at the Claire's Chic warehouse on South San Pedro Street. Donna Parker had coordinated the visit with Adam's Nevada probation officer, who had issued a formal notice of violation. The officers did not make a dramatic entrance. They simply walked in, showed their identification to the floor manager, and asked for Adam Cole. Rosa called me as it was happening. She was not at the warehouse. She heard it from Maria, one of the seamstresses, who had been with us for 11 years. Adam told them they had the wrong person, Rosa said. He kept saying there was a mistake. Then one of the officers showed him the paperwork and he stopped talking. Was anyone else frightened? I asked. I was thinking about Maria and the other women on the floor, women who came to work every morning to do honest work and deserve not to have someone else's crisis land in the middle of their day. Maria said it was over in 10 minutes, Rosa told me. Everyone went back to work. I thanked her and turned back to my desk. The DMCA notices went out the same afternoon. James had prepared the filings 2 days earlier, waiting only for me to give the final approval. Sierra had used 7 of Claire's Chic's unreleased design images in sponsored content across 3 platforms, posting them as a backdrop for brand partnerships that paid her directly, while the designs belonged entirely to us. Under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, we were entitled to demand immediate removal of any content using our protected material. The platforms had 72 hours to comply. The trademark complaint under the Lanham Act addressed a separate issue. Sierra had used the Claire's Chic name in 3 video titles and 1 paid partnership disclosure in a way that falsely implied an official affiliation with our brand. That misrepresentation had commercial consequences for us and legal consequences for her. James filed both on a Tuesday afternoon. By Thursday morning, Sierra's accounts on 2 major platforms had been suspended indefinitely pending review. A 3rd platform removed the specific content but left her account active. The brand partnerships unraveled within 48 hours. 2 companies contacted James directly to notify us that they were pursuing Sierra for breach of contract. She had guaranteed content deliverables she could no longer provide. A 3rd sent a demand letter for reimbursement of an advance payment. I did not take pleasure in reading those letters. I filed them. That evening, my receptionist called my cell, Miss Bennett. She said, "There's a woman in the lobby asking to see you. She says her name is Sierra Cole and that it's urgent." I looked at the stack of folders on my desk, the fall collection review notes, the insurance audit summary, the DMCA confirmation receipts. "Tell her I'll be down in 5 minutes," I said. I took 10. Sierra was sitting in the small reception area outside my office when I came down. She had dressed carefully, a structured blazer hair pinned back, the kind of appearance that takes effort to make look effortless. But her eyes were red at the corners, and she was holding her phone with both hands, the way people do when they are waiting for news that is not coming. She stood when she saw me. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. I gestured toward the conference room. We sat across from each other at the long table where I reviewed contracts and quarterly reports. I folded my hands and waited. "I know you have every legal right to do what you're doing," Sierra began. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the effort behind it. "I'm not here to argue that. She stopped, started again. I built that following over 4 years. Every video, every partnership, every comment I answered at midnight. That was real work, Claire. Whatever you think of me, that part was real." "I don't doubt it," I said. She looked up, surprised that I had not argued. "Then why?" "Because you used my designs without permission," I said. "And you used my brand name to imply an endorsement I never gave. I didn't file those complaints because I wanted to hurt you, Sierra. I filed them because you took something that belonged to me and built your career on top of it." Her jaw tightened. I tried to appeal the platform decisions. Both of them denied it within 24 hours. "I know," I said. "James drafted those filings carefully." She looked down at her hands. The engagement ring was still there. I noticed it and said nothing. "If I signed something," she said quietly, "an agreement, acknowledged the violation, agreed not to use any Claire's Chic material going forward, would you consider lifting the complaints?" I had expected this question. I had thought about my answer for 2 days. "Sierra," I said, "the night Ethan told me to pack my things and leave, did you know he was going to say that?" The question landed exactly where I aimed it. She did not flinch. She did not deny it. She looked at the surface of the conference table and took a careful breath, and that breath was the most honest thing she had said since sitting down. "I thought it would go differently," she said finally. "That's not an answer," I said. She met my eyes. "Yes," she said. "I knew." The room held that word for a moment. "Then you understand," I said, "why I'm not in a position to lift anything." I stood. "I wish you well, Sierra. Genuinely. My attorneys will be in touch about the remaining matters." She left without another word. I watched her walk through the lobby and out through the glass doors, and I felt something that was not triumph. It was closer to the particular sadness of watching a door close on something that could have been different. The industry event was 4 days later. The Los Angeles Textile and Fashion Forum was held annually at a venue in the Arts District. It was the kind of evening where every conversation was simultaneously personal and professional, where relationships that shaped the industry were maintained over glasses of wine and careful small talk. I had attended every year for 19 years. This year, Meg had asked to handle a small presentation during the networking hour. I did not ask her what it contained. I saw Arthur and Madeline Cole near the entrance at 8:15. Sierra had obtained 2 guest passes through a small accessories label she had worked with briefly. A last attempt, I assumed, to put her family in a room where they might reach me in public and expect me to perform graciousness for an audience. Arthur saw me first. He straightened his jacket and walked toward me with the expression of a man who had rehearsed his grievance carefully. "Claire," his voice was loud enough to carry, "we need to discuss what you've done to this family. You have humiliated my daughter. You have destroyed a young woman's career. Whatever disagreement you have with Ethan, these children did not deserve." The large screen behind the registration table came on. Meg had timed it precisely. The slide was simple white background, black text, Claire's chic letterhead at the top. It read personal financial support provided by Claire Bennett to the Cole and Bennett households, January 2021 through July 2024. Below that heading was a table. Every line item. Every month. Rent subsidies vehicle costs personal expenses charged to my accounts, Daphne's salary drawn without corresponding work product, the warehouse security contract that had covered Adam's salary for 14 months. At the bottom, a single bold figure, $1,240,000. The room was not loud. It was the particular quiet of people who are absorbing something they did not expect and are deciding simultaneously what it means and what they should say. Arthur's voice, when it came, was considerably smaller than it had been 30 seconds earlier. "Those numbers are accurate," I said, to the dollar. Madeline put her hand on Arthur's arm. It was the first time I had ever seen her reach for him in a way that looked like need rather than habit. They left before the presentation ended. I watched them move through the crowd toward the exit, Arthur's shoulders no longer square. Madeline's steps faster than her usual measured pace. Meg appeared beside me. "There's something about Ethan," she said. "Something I've been holding on to until the legal matters were further along." Her voice dropped. "I think you need to hear it. Not tonight, but soon." Meg came to the apartment on a Sunday morning. She brought coffee from the place on Fountain Avenue that Rosa liked, and she sat down at my kitchen table the way she had sat across from me in offices and boardrooms for 19 years. Steady, unhurried, prepared for a conversation that would not be easy. Rosa set out cups and left the room without being asked. "The settlement agreement is signed," Meg began. "Ethan's attorney negotiated a structured repayment schedule, 12% of his income monthly until the full amount is recovered. Daphne has agreed to the same terms. The criminal referral has been suspended pending compliance." She paused. "That part is done." "I know," I said. "James called Friday." Meg wrapped both hands around her cup. "Then I need to tell you the other thing." I had known it was coming since the night of the Fashion Forum. I had spent the days between then and now telling myself I was ready. Sitting across from Meg in my quiet Sunday kitchen, I understood I was not ready at all, but that it did not matter. Some things need to be heard regardless of whether you are prepared for them. 6 months before the dinner, Meg said one of our junior accountants flagged an irregularity in the vendor payments. She was new only 8 months with us, and she was not certain enough to bring it directly to me. So she sent a message to Ethan. He was VP of Operations. He was the appropriate person to notify. I looked at my coffee cup. I did not pick it up. He read it. Meg continued. I pulled the message logs after the filing. The platform shows a read receipt at 4:17 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in January. She stopped. He never forwarded it. He never flagged it internally. He deleted it 3 days later. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street. Somewhere above us, a neighbor's television murmured through the ceiling. He knew, I said. He knew something was wrong, Meg said carefully. Whether he understood the full scope, I can't say, but he knew enough to act and he chose not to. I thought about the dinner table, Ethan's rehearsed voice, the way he had looked at Arthur before he spoke, waiting for that small, confirming nod. I had told myself in the weeks afterward that my son had been weak, that he had been manipulated by people who were more calculating than he was, that fear and vanity had pushed him somewhere he would not have gone alone. This changed that. Weakness was not choosing to look away from evidence. That was a decision. Made on a Tuesday afternoon at 4:17 in the quiet of whatever room he had been sitting in, reading a message from a young woman who had done exactly what she was supposed to do. My eyes filled. I did not try to stop it. The tears came the way they had not come at the dinner table or in the car outside the Montrose or watching Arthur and Madeline leave the fashion forum. They came now in my own kitchen in front of the one person who had earned the right to see them. How long have you known? I asked. Since August, Meg said, about 3 weeks after the filing. I didn't tell you then because I was afraid it would affect your decisions. I didn't want you pulling back from the legal process because of him. You were protecting me, I said. I was protecting the outcome, she said. I hope that was the right call. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. It was, I said. We sat together for a while after that, not talking, finishing our coffee while the Sunday morning moved around us in its ordinary way. James called at noon with a separate piece of news Sierra had filed for divorce the previous Thursday. Under California's community property law, the court would divide assets acquired during the marriage equally between both parties. Ethan had no assets. The filing was largely procedural. That same afternoon, Meg heard through a mutual contact that Arthur Cole had called Ethan from the lobby of their hotel and told him to collect his bags. The exact words, according to the contact, were, "You promised us a life. You delivered nothing. We are done." Ethan had spent 2 nights in his car in a parking structure off Santa Monica Boulevard alone, because 3 years of building his world around the Cole family had left him with no one else to call. Every friend he had made before Sierra, he had gradually let go. Every connection outside that circle had been allowed to fade. The parking structure was the result of those small, accumulated abandonments. I heard this and sat with it for a long time. When Rosa came back into the kitchen to start lunch, she found me standing at the window looking at nothing in particular. "Is it bad?" she asked. "It's true," I said, "which is worse sometimes." She nodded and began to make lunch, and I stayed at the window a little longer, letting the weight of a Tuesday afternoon in January settle into its proper place in the architecture of everything that had happened. Then my phone rang. A number I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I answered. "Mom." Ethan's voice came through the speaker, low stripped of everything that was not exhaustion. "I know you don't have to pick up. I just need you to know that I'm sorry." 3 weeks passed before I heard from Ethan again. In that time, I finished the fall collection review, signed 2 new supplier contracts, and repainted the second bedroom of my West Hollywood apartment a shade of white that Rosa said looked exactly like the walls of the first home Gerald and I had rented together in Silver Lake 31 years ago. I had not planned it that way. Some things find their way back without being invited. I was reading at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening when the doorbell rang. Rosa answered it. I heard her say nothing, just a small intake of breath, and then she appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at me in a way that told me everything before she said a word. I went to the door. Ethan was standing in the hallway in the uniform of the restaurant where he had been working the late shift for the past 6 weeks, a plain white button-down black trousers, a small grease stain near the cuff that he had tried and failed to scrub out. He had lost weight. His face looked like a face that had been doing a great deal of thinking in very little comfort. He did not speak. He lowered himself onto one knee in the hallway of my apartment building, the way men in my mother's generation did when they meant something beyond words, and he stayed there with his head bowed and his hands open at his sides. "Get up, Ethan," I said. My voice was quiet. "Come inside." He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Meg had told me about the Tuesday afternoon in January where Rosa had asked me if it was bad, and I had told her it was true. He sat with his hands flat on the table surface, and he did not look away from me, which told me the weeks in the parking structure and the late shifts and the weight of the settlement repayment had done something to him that nothing else had managed to do before. "I'm not here to ask you for anything," he said. "I need you to know that before I say anything else. I'm not here for money or for the house or for you to call James and change anything. He stopped, pressed his lips together. When he continued, his voice was lower. "I sat in my car for 2 nights and I thought about every single thing I did and everything I didn't do. The accountant's message, the dinner, the way I pointed at you." He shook his head slowly. "I don't have words big enough for what I did, Mom. I don't think those words exist." I looked at my son. I thought about the boy who had fallen asleep against my shoulder on every long car ride, who had called me from his dorm at 2 in the morning, his first week in college, because he did not want to admit he was homesick. I thought about the man who had stood at a dinner table and pointed his finger at me while Arthur Cole watched with quiet satisfaction. Both of those people were sitting across from me now. "I know you're sorry," I said. "I believe you." I paused. "But sorry doesn't rebuild what was there before. It only gives us somewhere to start from." He nodded. He had expected that. "I made mistakes too," I said. "I gave you everything you asked for because I was afraid of what it meant if I didn't. I confused giving with loving, and I let that go on for years. That's on me as much as it is on you." Ethan's eyes filled. He did not try to speak. "I'm not going to interfere with the repayment schedule," I said. "I'm not going to call James. I'm not going to offer you money or a place to stay or a position at Claire's Chic." I folded my hands on the table. "What I am going to do is give you 2 names." I slid a piece of paper across the table. "The first is a financial counselor on Wilshire Boulevard. She works with people rebuilding after significant debt. She's good and her sliding scale fees are manageable on a server's income." I paused. "The second is a warehouse manager in Culver City who needs a floor supervisor. It is hard work physically. The pay is honest. I told him you might call." Ethan looked at the paper for a long time. "Why?" he asked. "Because I am your mother," I said. "That has never changed. It will never change. But being your mother no longer means standing between you and the consequences of your choices. It means trusting that you are capable of surviving them." He picked up the paper and folded it carefully the way people fold things they intend to keep. Rosa appeared with 2 cups of tea and set them on the table without comment. She went back to the kitchen. I heard her moving around quietly, the small sounds of someone giving 2 people the space they needed while remaining close enough to matter. Ethan wrapped both hands around his cup. The grease stain on his cuff caught the light. "I start to understand," he said slowly, "what it costs to earn something." "Good," I said. We sat together for another hour. We did not solve everything. Some things between a mother and a son take years to find their shape. And I had learned by then that patience was not weakness. It was the only way through. When he stood to leave, he looked at the apartment, the modest rooms, the repainted walls, Gerald's photograph on the windowsill in the afternoon light. "It suits you," he said. "More than the estate did." I thought about that after he left. Rosa cleared the cups. The street outside was doing what Los Angeles streets do at night, murmuring with the low, constant energy of a city that does not stop for anyone's reckoning. I had spent 25 years building Claire's chic from 2 sewing machines and a rented studio. I had built a marriage, a home, and a family with the same hands. I had built walls around all of it when Gerald died, and I had let those walls become something my son could lean on instead of learning to stand. I did not regret loving him. I did not regret the years. What I understood now, sitting in a quiet apartment that was entirely my own, in a life I had chosen and paid for and reclaimed, was that loving someone and financing their avoidance of reality were not the same thing. They had never been the same thing. I had simply spent a very long time pretending otherwise. I turned off the kitchen light. Outside, Los Angeles kept moving, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was content to let it. I have thought about that Thursday night in July many times since then, not with anger anymore, with clarity. For years I told myself that giving without limit was the same as loving without condition. It is not. It never was. I learned that the hard way through a dinner table, a credit card declined in front of a restaurant full of strangers, a house gone dark in the middle of a Los Angeles summer, and a Tuesday afternoon in January, when my son read a warning and chose to look away. If you are carrying someone who is capable of walking, you are not helping them. You are teaching them that they never have to try. I believe God places certain moments in our lives not to break us, but to show us the shape of what we were never meant to carry alone. If there is one thing I wish I had understood sooner, it is this. The most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to shield them from who they are becoming. Do not do what I did. Do not wait until you are sitting at your own dinner table being called something you do not recognize in a home you built with your own hands before you decide your boundaries deserve to exist. These are the kinds of revenge stories with mom that no one plans to live, and yet so many of us do. We stay too long, give too much, and mistake exhaustion for devotion. If any part of this story sat with you today, I want to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me, where do you draw the line for the people you love most? The family revenge stories that stay with us are rarely about money. They are about the moment we finally choose ourselves. If these revenge stories with mom and family revenge stories reach someone who needed them today, please share this with someone you care about and subscribe so you never miss another story on this channel. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. And before you go, some of the stories on this channel contain fictional elements created purely for the purpose of reflection and inspiration. If this kind of content is not for you, we completely respect that. Please feel free to explore other content that speaks to you. We will be here whenever you are ready.